Okay, hello everyone. My name is Lana. I work at the West Orange Public Library. I work there doing collection development and book discussions. First of all, I wanted to thank everyone who's joining us tonight and everyone who will watch this later for supporting the West Orange Library. We are very much excited to present this program and other virtual programs while our library remains closed. This month we will have one more author visit, and then in June we have 4 more authors visiting us virtually. So you can look at our calendar online. And also I would like to mention that in addition to the digital offerings we have through eLibrary New Jersey and eBuckles consortiums, the library is currently purchasing additional titles that will be available only to West Orange patrons. So what it means is that for people who wants to read an electronic book or audio book, there will be practically no wait time. To see all our offerings in adult services department and youth services department, you can definitely go and check our Facebook page and our library website. On library website, you can click on calendar or just see the slides that in the middle of the website. One more thing, we're going to be recording this presentation, and it will be available on YouTube and Facebook as well. And now it's my enormous pleasure to welcome Linda Rawlins, who kindly agreed to join us tonight. And she will talk about her life, her books, her latest book. And after the talk, you're more than welcome to ask any questions you have. Okay, so let me just see. Okay, Linda.
Thank you, Lana. I appreciate it. And thank you for inviting me to the West Orange Library. I had been there several years ago when one of my other books came out, and I'm pleased to come back for another visit. As some of you may know, I'm a physician. I am a board certified physician who has been practicing many years. And I guess what I can say is one night I was having a conversation with a cardiologist after a very long shift, and we kind of asked each other, you know, if you could start life again and have a second round, what would you choose to be? And I don't know why, it just came out. I said, I want to write books. And it's funny, the cardiologist said he wanted to be a motivational speaker. So, you know, but then we were at a point saying, why not? You know, why it's not that it's too late. I think I was a writer my whole life because I started writing a book in 5th grade. I had read all of the Nancy Drew and Hardy Boy books already by 5th grade. And I actually started writing my first book. I actually wish I had those pages. I would love to see what I wrote in 5th grade or how I wrote. It would be really interesting. But I went throughout school. I won poetry contests and things like that. I was a voracious reader. I read all the time, and I think that's a big, important point of being a writer. I would read in multi-genres. Back then, I liked sci-fi, and when I was younger, I didn't mind reading things by Dean Koontz and other writers. But then as I aged a little bit, I suddenly didn't want to read so many things about anybody being hurt. So I stopped reading things where children were involved or pets were hurt or things like that, and switched a little bit more to the cozy genre. Cozy is a type of genre where everything is clean and usually justice is always done in the end, which is the type of thing that I like, because in my day job right now, I was board certified and board certified for many, many years in general practice, and now I work in hospice. So when you see some of the things you see that I see on a regular basis, I like things that are sweet and nicely. So that's kind of why I do cozy mystery. But I will say that with the cozy mystery, I also involve a medical component, because that's what I do. So in all of the books that I write, usually there's a character who's a medical component, or I talk to you about things that happen medically. In one of my original series books, I take you through an autopsy, or it involves a character who's a physician, or maybe the setting is in a hospital or something along those lines. So because that is what I do, I always have a medical component to that. My first series was about a trauma surgeon who, you know, when you work in trauma, you're just told, get ready, you have a case coming in. You really don't have the kind of time to get to know your patient and family. And in that particular case, a woman trauma surgeon was brought in and she saved a man's life. All she knows is that there was a shooting, police brought the man in. After she does the surgery and saves his life, she finds out that he was responsible for a break-in in her sister's home. And her sister was killed and her niece was in a coma. And the book deals with how she was involved with all that guilt. And then she ran up to Vermont, she left Boston. And while there, she is contemplating guilt. She's still working in a little bit of a hospital. And she winds up meeting a priest who happens to be a psychologist. And both of them wind up getting together to protect a candy striper who is also volunteering at the church, because someone's out to get the candy striper. So she's dealing with her things, the priest is dealing with his things, but they come together to save this girl. So I had an actual physician as that character. I switched to Cozy Shore Mysteries in my second series, my Misty Manor series. And a lot of people really enjoy escaping. And I think that's the reason that a lot of us read, right? Kind of to escape what we do every single day. So I'm the type of person that would rather escape into something a little bit light and cheery. So that series is very, very popular. But I don't know, I still felt like I wanted to write a little bit about medicine. So my most recent book came out in December, Midnight Shift, is again about a physician who is a surgeon. And she starts losing patients, but doesn't understand why, because everything went right in the surgery. And she's stressed over it, and she starts dreaming. And she starts dreaming about the first patient who dies, who starts giving her clues to solve the mystery of why they're dying. So it's a little bit of a paranormal, because she gets help to solve the mystery from the other side. So it's a little bit of an interesting approach. And one of the reasons I think that I did that is because in the hospice world we live in, sometimes the question of whether or not there's anything behind the veil, or you can draw back the veil, so to speak. We've had, some episodes, I think everybody who works in hospice. So we kind of bring that into the foreplay with that. So that's basically a summary of myself in the books. This is my latest one, the one that Lana was talking about, Midnight Shift, about the surgeon who starts dreaming and starts receiving messages from the dead person to help save them. So I know there's anything specific that anybody would like to know. I could just keep talking, but I don't want to bore everyone.
Should we open up for the questions, or you want to add something else to your initial presentation?
Well, what I would like to say is, so I basically started writing, and my first book came out in 2011. And, when you write your first book, it's really a phenomenal sensation that you have this book that your first book is like your baby, and you'll always be proud of your first book. So it was out there, but I wanted to network, I wanted to join. So what I would like to mention is that I was then able, by the number of books I sold, to join Mystery Writers of America. You're not allowed to simply be an active member unless you've reached a certain level. And I also joined Sisters in Crime. And the chapter I specifically joined, besides national, is Central Jersey. Sisters in Crime is an organization that was actually started by Sarah Paretsky and Phyllis Whitney and Mary Higgins Clark to help women be represented more fairly in the marketplace. Again, during the early 80s, they still found that the contracts went more to men and women were not paid the same as men. So these women got together during one of the major writing conferences and decided to put together an organization called Sisters in Crime. That organization has now grown. Not only is there a national chapter, but there's international chapters, and then there are about 50 state chapters. After being in the organization about a year or two, I was elected as president. So I'm president of the Sisters in Crime Central Jersey chapter last year and this year, and basically get together with my group and try to support writers, help writers, guide them on their way to their career. The organization itself has grown to the point, though, that now men and women, it's open to everyone who basically wants to have a network and to be supported during their writing. It's really great because you have writers that are extremely experienced and writers that are brand new, that are emerging authors, and we really try to form a network to help all of them. There is an online chapter called Guppies. It's for new writers. There's probably over 1,000 members just in that chapter. And very often, some of the actual pros, very well-known pros will come on and offer tips and tricks about writing and things that when you start out writing, you really don't understand all the aspects of the trade or the publishing industry. And then as you grow in the industry, you begin to learn all of these things. So I think that's a very important piece. And we do write, but, we do a lot of other things. We go to conferences and fairs and street fairs, and then we have talks. And, one of the things I'm in this year is the mentor program for Mystery Writers of America, where people can submit their work and, we read that and try to offer advice for them. And again, these are the things where you see the Edgar's Awards, and there's so many different awards for writing. So it's really exciting. But part of when as Stephen King had said, if you don't have time to read, you don't have time to write, because it goes hand in hand. You always have to be reading while you're writing. And initially, depending upon what you write, you want to read in the genre you write to see what's out there, but then you need to expand and, whatever types of genres you want to bring in, whether it's romance or thriller or horror or whatever, you need to expand to. So there's a lot of that connection, and it's a really tight-knit community, but it's a very supportive community, which is great. I've met a lot of very interesting people, and I think that also expands a lot of our perspective on different things that happen in life. So that's important too. So anybody who is an emerging author, I would recommend they look into a writing community. You can find them on social media. Right now, we don't have the meetings in person, but you can certainly find them on social media. You can join official ones like Sisters in Crime or Mystery Writers of America, or in New Jersey, there's many others. So I'd suggest that you do reach out and join that. Actually, North Jersey and Montclair Write Group has a very big organization as well. They break up into many different groups depending upon what you like to write. If it's poetry or sci-fi or horror or things like that. So I think that's also important. You definitely want to connect.
Very interesting. So I'm gonna unmute everyone, I guess, and then if someone wants to ask something, you can just wave or start asking questions. No questions yet. Okay, I'm gonna start with some questions for you, Linda.
Sure.
So one of the questions that I know some people might be curious about is, how do you get your books published? Do you use the same publishers? Was it difficult to get the first book published? How was the process? If you want to
Well,
talk a little bit.
the publishing process itself, nowadays, there's many, many different paths to publishing. And the traditional method, of course, is that you write your book and you have to make your book as perfect as possible. And then what happens is you start querying agents and you send them a letter with the content of your book and the stylings and basically greeting them to see if you're a good match. If an editor is interested, then they'll call you, agent, and you can use an agent editor, and they will then reach out to you, and then you have a conversation and see that if you're a good fit. You have to be very careful that the agent or editor you're working with is well vetted. You don't want to connect, I think, immediately with somebody who has very little experience, because the whole role of an agent or editor is to bring you along. And they'll look at things like your content, they'll look at things like your book and make suggestions, and they'll help bring you along. Now you can join with an agent or editor. You can self-publish. My first book was self-published. And then it's interesting, though, I was very lucky along the way, because my first book was self-published, and a gentleman named Bill, who was the national editor of a railway magazine, had introduced me to someone from Penguin to talk to for some advice. And that's what happens. Every time you reach out and meet somebody else, you wind up getting more and more advice, and you learn the industry and you do things a little bit better. And that's what it's all about, because you're constantly learning. You can learn from every single person that you meet. So it's very good to meet people, see what they want to teach you, and then you can move further in the industry. But for new writers, I definitely recommend the community. And even if you have to self-publish, I think last year it's a figure something like 1.5 million books were self-published. And there's some very, very talented people. I think that there's an astigmatism to self-publishing that there should not be, because it's not sometimes the quality of the writing. Sometimes it's just a matter of what's going on. Penguin for years had a lot of cozy writers, and recently they've released a lot of those writers and not renewed, but they're all very, very talented writers that are looking for new homes. So then they go to Crooked Lane or they go to other publishers. So I think you need to just start writing. You need to form a discipline, sit down every day, formulate your ideas, and just start writing. Everybody, they say, has a book in them, but it takes discipline to write that book. On the average, there's 250 words on a page, and the average book, true novel, is about 75,000 words. So if you were able to write 1,000 words a day, 4 pages a day, at minimum, it would take you 3 months to write the book. And then usually that's the easy part. The next is going through the editing process, looking at content, looking at line editing, looking at polishing, and doing the polishing and going from there. So it takes a while, to have a formulated project. And writers will often start sometimes with an outline, but by the time you get to the end of the book, it's completely different than how you started. I've had people that in the beginning I didn't intend to be villains, and by the end they were the villains, and the people that were the villains turned out to be the love interest or something else. Many authors will tell you books will write themselves. You kind of start to sit down, and the characters basically blossom in front of you and do what they're going to do. I'm a very visual writer. I'm the type of person who, it's almost as if I'm watching a movie, and when I type, I'm simply typing out what I see, as opposed to saying, okay, this person will now do this. It's more like I'm in my mind watching a little movie, and now I'm going to type out what's in my mind. So when you do that kind of writing, and a lot of times it's by the seat of your pants, you're not using an outline, things do change, and the book does write itself. So it's a constant learning curve from moment one, whether you start when you're 12 or whether you start when you're 60. And there's many writers that write late into life. I mean, we know that, Mary Higgins Clark, who just passed, I mean, she was in her 90s and still writing. And, there's many cozy writers, again, still in their 90s that are still writing. Lillian Jackson Braun, famous cat series. I think she wrote until she was something like 98.
Mm-hmm.
So it's something that actually also helps you. It helps you therapeutically sometimes to think, and it keeps you young. When I was practicing before I was actively writing at 4 in the morning, because it's the only time I can find time, one of the biggest things I would have my patients do when they come in, because a lot of the work we did is very emotional, it's painful. I was not in the part of medicine that's happy with babies. I was more in the painful part of medicine where everybody who came in, you know, had concerns or anxiety or worry, just like everybody who goes to the doctor today, right? They're worried about whether or not they have COVID or anything. But one tool that worked very well is having patients keep an emotional diary. And it's not the type of diary where they say, I did this today, I made the bed, I did the wash. What I asked them to do was start the diary by saying, I feel. And then from there, the words would just flow. If somebody was angry, if they were depressed, if they were sad, they would just start to say, I feel, and then start to write it out. And when you write things, it uses a little bit of a different part of the brain than when you say things. So it actually is a therapeutic tool. It helps you work through some of the feelings that you're having. So we use that quite a bit. And there's a lot of ways you can use writing in medicine without actually writing a book. And one is that emotional diary, where you can help people almost in a therapeutic way. But the other way is we would also go into nursing homes, and anybody who can could help a patient formulate their memoirs for their family. You know, you would just go in once a week, a volunteer, for instance, from the office, and they can help. They can write down things, stories that patients tell them. I used to love geriatric patients when I first opened my practice, and still do. I'm almost afraid, though, that I'm getting closer to that side than when I first started practicing. But I met so many people that taught me so many things. Even my children came with me to visit a patient once who was able to show them her tattoo from Auschwitz before she died and to explain that living history. And I think all too often we don't give elderly patients the time to tell us about their time in the service. Or I had a gentleman who was, you know, in World War II, and to tell us what the reality of that was like. Or even now, you know, patients that suffer a lot of different things, patients who were in, you know, when the towers came down or things like that. And really a very big part of what we need to do is just sit and listen. And we would learn so much and gain so much experience. People are very interesting when you really listen to what they've done in life.
Wow. So when you start writing a book, do you know the subject matter already, or you have to do some research in preparation for the book? Do you do the research before or while you write?
I do a lot of research. I think you always have to research while you're writing, always, because you always want your details to be accurate. You know, you may be writing a small little chapter and want to reference something and say, oh, wait, now I have to stop and I have to look all that up, because you want everything to be accurate. You know, you may even want to describe, I don't know, let's say you want to describe an old playground. You know, you have to then do research to think about, what did a playground look like when you were 10 years old versus what a playground looks like now? Even the materials that the swings were made out of, or those things were made of, were very, very different than they are now. The slides are different. So whenever you write a scene, you have to make sure that scene is accurate. And readers will come back to you and say, you know what, this wasn't made until 1990, so it doesn't make sense that you reference 1970 in your book and you're talking about this, because it didn't exist then. And they will know, and they will comment, and they will get back to you. So initially you may want to research what your main topic is going to be, but as you go along and you're writing tiny little things, you have to research all of that to make sure it's real. I believe in trying to make it as real as it should be. And it may be anything from mentioning the sewer system in a certain place. Somebody, let's say a criminal, jumped away down a manhole and ran to a sewer system in a city. You want to make sure there really is one there that criminal can do. You know, those types of things where, you know, all of a sudden you're like, wait a minute, you know, is that plausible? you know, and you have to look that up. And then you're in the next chapter and you have to look that up. Whether it's somebody taking a vitamin, or whether it's a geographic thing, or whether it's a historical thing, or maybe it's an article of clothing during a certain time, you're constantly researching for accuracy. Because if you're not accurate, your readers will let you know. So
on average, how long?
I enjoy researching. On the average, for me to write and research, maybe 3 to 5 months to write a book. And then what you'll find is, even when you're going back the first time in editing and polishing, you're doing more research to make sure you're right. For instance, in the next book that I'm writing, the one that's coming out, I decided that one of the police officers is going to start a canine unit. Well, and I've been thinking about it. I mean, it makes sense for the plot of the book, but I know nothing about starting a canine patrol unit. So that's a lot of research right there. You know, how you obtain the dog, what type of dog, how do you train the dog, what's the dog allowed to do when the dog's off duty, what kind of protective gear do they let the dog wear, you know, that type of thing. So I think Jane raised her hand. Did you have a question?
I had a question.
Oh yeah, thanks. This is fascinating. I was curious about how you find the time to write and, you know, practice medicine, what your balance is, because it seems like both would take up a lot of time.
That's very true. I happen to be one of those people with chronic insomnia that I wake up at 4 in the morning. Most writers do. Their artistic side comes on at 4 in the morning, and you wake up, and if nothing else, you're lying in bed doing a lot of thinking. So to me, there's 2 parts of writing. One is the story, and the story is going on in your head. The second part is where you sit and you actually type, but that may not be where you're actually doing the story writing, if that makes sense. So a lot of times I will finish a chapter and say, okay, we got to this point. What would be logical to happen next? And maybe that's something that I'll think about while I'm driving in the car, or I wake up at 4 in the morning, or I work that out in my head. And then when I get time, I'll sit down and I'll type it all up. But the actual creativity really would happen more around 4 in the morning, or for me, you know, because then once I get to work, I am quite busy. Sometimes on a weekend. But it's truly, you know, when they say right side, left side of the brain, I find that certain work, and I consider medicine to be fairly scientific work, you can't do both well at the same time. You either have to be in a totally creative mode where you can daydream and think and imagine, and that's what a lot of writing is, versus when you're scientific. If you were a doctor, physician, accountant, where you're doing a lot of numbers and scientific things, it's hard to be creative, and really probably dangerous to be creative, because it would not let you lend accuracy to what you're doing. So it's a space that you need a little bit of time to get into. You just can't take 10 minutes and you know, do something in writing. You really have to try, I think, to get into that creative space, you know, and whatever you need to do it. Sometimes, like I'll look at photos to put me in that place, or whatever it takes to have me feel that I'm there. I am a person that I dream a lot. I dream in all 5 senses, and I write in all 5 senses. And that's one thing that I think is important. So for instance, when I'm writing about the boardwalk, yes, we'll look at the ocean, but the biggest thing that I associate is a sense of smell with being down the shore, right? If you closed your eyes and you could smell the brine, and you could smell some Taylor ham or a grilled cheeseburger, as well as the popcorn and those French fries, and then you have that sunscreen go by you, I would associate more with the sense of smell sometimes than what I'm looking at. So when you do write, you're supposed to write in all 5 senses, and keep that in mind, right? So that's a big part of it.
So it looks like when you go to sleep, then it sort of resets your mind, turning from scientific to
absolutely,
and then you start on the creative side at 4 o'clock in the morning, and then go back to scientific side.
And I think
4 hours later.
Yeah, and I think if you talk to a lot of writers, they'll all tell you that they seem to be more creative at 4 in the morning. You know, that seems to be when writers' brains wakes up. You know, we all start dreaming and we're creative and thinking about things. And I am one of those people that I have a pad too at the side of the bed. I'll try to write it down because I will remember a dream for about an hour, but then eventually it'll fade. And sometimes though there's some dreams that are very interesting, you know, that you might want to remember. Or sometimes dreams actually become a large area of inspiration for people to write about. They'll tell you something they dreamed about, you know, sparked an idea, and they turned that into a whole book. So you need to embrace that if you want to. You know, you can grow that idea.
And when it comes to your characters, are they mostly based on people that you met, or they just live in your mind?
I think most of my characters are composites of personalities that I've met, but not specific people. So again, I've met a lot of different personalities with working with, you know, the office and meeting so many different people that are coming in for visits. And for instance, you may meet, you know, the angry housewife, or you may meet, you know, the petulant child, or you may meet a happy young youth, or you may meet a gentleman who's just so tired and can't wait to retire. But, you know, when you start to meet different personality types, that's how you start to build your characters. Because again, you need to feel something about the characters when you read your book. You need to care about them. And if it was a flat character who didn't have feelings and emotions and problems, then you really wouldn't care that much. So that's a big part of it, I think. And you know, when you're a physician, you meet thousands of people, and it's kind of a combination of all of those people and their lives, and sometimes their pain, and sometimes their celebrations, and you kind of roll that all into one and create your characters.
Do you ever get writer's block?
I do, especially if I'm working in the hospital or I'm working and it's a very stressful time. It's hard to sometimes lasso that creativity. You need to be a little bit relaxed to be able to open up your mind and do that. For me, when I have writer's block, the types of things that help me are music and sometimes watching TV shows, and especially the older ones, like when I watch a Murder, She Wrote or a Columbo, or you know, something that kind of puts you back into where you want to be. One of the other tools I use is I'll listen to a song that has some, you know, particularly good lyrics, and I'll try to write a story around those lyrics. And I like to do that all the time. You know, I'll listen to whatever lyrics were chosen and try to make a story around the lyrics. And that helps to get you back into there too. But when you start, you know, when you're a routine writer, you're supposed to write, again, as I said, you know, at least even 1 page a day. And once you latch on to that, it's the same thing as any other creative project. For instance, if you were making an Afghan and you were going to crochet 1 square a night, every night you now look forward to maybe watching your favorite show and crocheting that square, right? You'd start building the discipline. And it's the same thing, because when you finish this chapter and you already know now what you want to do in the next one, it pulls you along and it pulls you along and you keep doing it. So that's what you have to do in order to maintain the discipline for writing, so that you get that done on time. And I think any project, any creative project is the same. And there's many different crafts that everybody, you know, does, but it's the same sort of discipline and planning that takes place.
Do you watch medical shows? Do you like watching them on TV? Like Grey's Anatomy, Good Doctor, stuff like that.
I'm probably the only person that has never seen Grey's Anatomy. When I was young, believe it or not, one of the shows I used to love to watch was a show called Quincy. I don't know if anybody remembers that show, but it's about a medical examiner that used to solve mysteries. And I'll watch, on occasion, Diagnosis Murder with my mom, you know, about a doctor that solves mysteries. I find that most of the medical shows have absolutely zero resemblance to real medicine. You know, in these shows, you know, these are doctors and people that, you know, are working, and yet it seems like they're always out investigating, and that's not the way the real world works in medicine. You know, normally you have a caseload of 30 patients and 4 minutes to see them all, and you don't have that type of time. But you know, I mean, occasionally I'll watch medical shows because I know the terminology. Sometimes it makes you crazy when what they're doing is inaccurate. But yeah, I mean, I do like to see that because I know medicine, and you know, so I enjoy watching medical shows and how they work. But I like other shows too.
Yeah.
I usually like shows where justice is done, because sometimes in the field that I work in, you know, we don't always get to kill the cancer, or we don't always get to save the patient. So when I watch a show where the villain gets squashed and the justice is done, then I'm very happy with that kind of a show too.
How do you come up with the storylines? Because they're really fascinating. And so in the beginning, once you have some idea, and then how do you develop further? Do you use your everyday experience, or do you like read on the subject? What's the process of kind of building a great storyline?
Well, it's strange, because sometimes, you know, you'll be doing something common at work, and you know, something will happen, and again, we're trained to save lives, right? So what if we turned it around and say, how could I kill somebody like that, right? If I see a particularly heavy paperweight, or a certain chemical comes into the office, or I know somebody has an allergy to nuts or whatever, that's what you say, how would I kill somebody and then get away with it, right? And then you start building your story. Well, how would first a reader would really want to know why you'd want to kill somebody, right? And then you try to figure out how you'd get away with it. And you say, okay, well, if I can have this person eat these nuts, but then I would say, how would I get the nuts in the room for them to eat? Okay, well, then maybe a caterer drops them off because they're providing lunch to the office that day. Okay, then why are they? And you just have to keep building that story. And that's basically how it comes about. It's very rare that you have an entire story, soup to nuts, you know, in the beginning. You just keep building, or you'll keep saying, I need these nuts to be in this building at this time. How do I get them in there? And then that's how you build that, and so on and so forth. So it's like putting a puzzle together from the middle out, if that makes sense. I generally know who the characters are going to be, and I generally know who I want to die, and I know who the villain is, and I know how I'm going to kill them. But the rest of it you have to fill in. So, and sometimes it falls in place very easily, and sometimes it doesn't. You have to work it a little bit, because you paint yourself into a corner. But generally I do pretty well working it. So, yeah.
So this last book, Midnight Shift, how is it different? How is this book different from the books in your other series? So I understand this is the first book in the new series, so that's not going to be a series.
It may be a series. This is the first book in the new series, and this one is about a doctor, Dr. Elizabeth Brooks. And so first of all, this one goes back to being completely medical. And to your question before about the TV, there's some people who love reading about medical issues, and there's some people that absolutely hate it. They find it frightening. So this goes back to being medical. We are in the hospital, we're in the surgical suite, we're in the office, so we're seeing what the normal routine is. But this is also the first book that really, really brings in more of a paranormal component, and sort of raises that question, that how much contact do you believe that you can have with people who pass away? For those of us who've been in hospice a long time, we all have some stories of things that have happened that should not have happened, or we've been told things by people before they died that they shouldn't know. I mean, there are stories amongst hospice workers that you'll hear. And, you know, some people do believe we're connecting with the dead, some people don't. But I did bring some of that paranormal into this book through the dreams. I mean, we've had times where we've had a father and son on hospice, and the son was getting ready to die, because you can tell by certain signs that it'll be soon. And we've told the father, and the father turned around and said, no, that can't be, because I'm supposed to be his greeter. You know, that's the kind of thing that gives everybody goosebumps. What does that mean? How do you know that? You know, how is all of that predestined? Well, sure enough, suddenly the son rebounded and the father died, and then the son died 2 days later. So I guess he got to be his greeter. You know, but stories like that kind of, you know, give you gooseflush, because we really don't know, you know, and, you know, or I've had patients who've said to me that I won't be here for my birthday in 2 weeks. And as a physician, I'm like, the patient looks pretty stable to me. And sure enough, the patient wasn't with us in 2 weeks. You know, very often people will tell you things they see and hear before they die, and we assume that they're just auditory or visual hallucinations or as a result of medicine, but who knows, right? Who knows? I can never say with certainty what's going on. Or how many stories have you heard about somebody dying on the operating table, and they floated above the operating table and saw these things and knew somebody was in the hospital waiting for them, when they really shouldn't have that kind of knowledge? You know, who knows? But this is the first book where I wrote that paranormal. So what's different about this series is this is more paranormal. It's more medical. So a little bit more serious issues, whereas the Misty series is a little bit more escape from the world, go down the beach, relax. Even though there's mysteries and things that do take place in each book, murder mysteries that need to be solved, it's a little bit more lighthearted, a little less medicine, and a little bit more just escapism, pure escapism.
Well, it's fascinating. This COVID-19, how has COVID affected your writing these days? Does it give you more information? I mean, not information, inspiration to write your new novel? Are you working on something that might be based on this on these current events?
Right now, I would not want to write about COVID or dystopian time or things along those lines. There's many people that I work with, and some of them who have been home now for about 8 or 9 weeks. And some of the writers I work with have said it's been wonderful because they've gotten a lot of extra writing in. A lot of writers, because their routine is upset, feel that they can't focus. My routine is busy. I don't get as much creative time because when you finally get home from the office, you're just exhausted, and you really just, when you're very tired, you can't be creative.
Yeah.
So for me, it's not been a good situation. Other writers who are not working, who are home, have found that it's fine. I think in general, I just actually read something where they found that readers really don't want to read a lot about viruses and as I said, dystopian fiction, because they're seeing enough of it on TV. Again, I think they want to go towards things that are light. And it's funny because I had just read a novel about a virus in December, which almost is mimicking this exact episode. But if you read about the history of pandemics, there's a typical pattern, and it's following that, and that's what the books follow. But again, as I said before, when I do one thing in life all the time, when I watch TV or read a book or go to the movies, I want the opposite thing. So if I'm doing medicine all day long, a lot of times when I watch TV, I might want to, watch something else. Like I said, where the good guy always wins. There's certain nights where I need to go home and just it be a Hallmark night, and where nothing bad's going to happen, and the dogs and everybody are happy. So for me, I've had less writing time and need that little bit more of escapism. That's kind of what it's done for me. COVID's going to be around for a while, so it's time to get that new normal routine going on.
What do you think is the most difficult part when writing?
Well, honestly, I think a big part of it is the discipline, is getting yourself to sit down in that seat every single night and write. It's sort of like committing yourself to an exercise program. You're very motivated in the beginning, and I'm excited. I joined the gym. I'm going to do this. Well, the question is, what happens when you get to the 2-week part? Are you still disciplined? Are you still writing? I think that's hard for a lot of new writers to be disciplined about doing it. Once the hardest part about a book for me is probably the first 10 or 15% of the book, because that's where you're kind of setting the stage and your characters, and you're introducing everything and everybody. But once you get to that storyline and now things are happening, I find a book becomes easier and easier to write, because now you kind of know exactly where you're going in your head and you're just writing it all, Another hard part about writing a book, then after you write, you're recommended to take your manuscript and put it away for 3 weeks, then take it out with a fresh eye and now start to polish. You have to start from page 1 and start all over again. And when you read it with a fresh voice in your mind, you're like, that character wouldn't say that word, or that character doesn't make sense. And you have to polish it 4 or 5 times. And each time you do better polishing it. So when it takes time to do all that and discipline to honestly be a career author. So that's a hard part, I believe, too. And then obviously that be by the time you get the whole book done, and then even once it's published, then you still, as any author in any house now, still has to do their own marketing and publishing, and marketing and advertising and things. They want you to do a lot of that now yourself. So that's also time.
Do you work on the cover as well with the graphic artist, or it's up to the publisher what to choose?
That's the one thing that when you sign a contract, the publisher usually will always choose the cover. There's somebody at Riverbench Publishing that does my covers. I can always suggest what I see in my head, and they may or may not agree. But normally, when you sign a contract with a publisher, they usually reserve the total right to the cover and sometimes to the title. You really don't have a lot of say over that. It depends also on your writing contract. But there's somebody at Riverbench that does my covers for me, but I get to suggest what I'm thinking. So, and again, when you brand yourself, for instance, every single one of my Misty series has a lighthouse on the cover. Somewhere, you'll see a lighthouse somewhere on every single cover. So that theme is always there with my Misty series. You'll know there'll be an ocean, a lighthouse. So that's what they do as well.
Any questions from anyone? So are you currently working on a new novel, or you giving yourself a break to breathe and relax a bit?
I am currently writing the 5th book of the Misty series. And again, for the past 2 months, it's been a little hard to find that space, but I'm starting to roll on it now. So that'll be good. And I'm hoping by the end of the summer, perhaps we can have that one out and done. So we shall see. It takes place in Misty Point, our favorite place down the shore. And I can guarantee you somebody dies. So, yeah, but it's a wonderful thing. So, and I thank you for inviting me in to talk about the books and all.
Yes, thank you so much. I think I probably have one more question about your favorite authors, or maybe has it changed? Has your taste changed? Whether you found new authors to read recently? How does it work for you as a reader?
Well, first of all, I try to rotate, because what I'll do is I try to read within my genre. And I know one of the ways, it sounds kind of crazy, but when I buy a book or go into a library, I try to have other authors out of that same section. Or sometimes when you buy a book, they'll say, if you like this author, you may like this one as well. And I'll check those authors out, because I want to see what's being written in the same genre that I'm in. But then on occasion, I like to read something. I like drama, so I like to read things like Michael Connelly, and I like reading about Harry Bosch, and I like to read I also like to read geographically, which I had said this at a conference once, and everybody kind of looked at me strange, but I will read seasonally and geographically. So if it's in the fall, I will read things about New England. That's when I like to read about New England, the same way Hallmark puts those movies. When it gets to be January 1st, for instance, a writer that I love to read is Randy Wayne White, because he's always in the Caribbean. So I'll read books about the Caribbean in January and February, which I know sounds strange, but I do that like on a roll. So I'll read something like Barbara Ross, another Sin Sea Sisters in Crime writer. I'll read Barbara Ross about Maine when it gets to be in the fall. And I'll read Randy Wayne White about being in the Caribbean in January. And then maybe during the summer, I'll read something else, you know. So it's strange, but I have different seasons and different geographies that I like to read. And I actually sometimes feel like I travel there. I just finished a book that was down a surfer in Costa Rica, and I've never surfed. I'm not somebody that would ever surf, but reading her book, you really did feel like you were surfing, you know, as close as you're going to get. And I like that escapism and learning something completely new or something out of my comfort zone, because I kind of feel like I was there. You know, I get that experience because I know what the water would be and the temperature of the ocean and all, but you know, now we added that component to it. So, but I normally don't like to read about skiing in Aspen in the winter because it's already cold enough. So I'll save that for July. I don't read a lot of nonfiction. Any nonfiction I read will be in medicine. So I'll read scientific journals and nonfiction that way. And especially now, I'll read the news up to a certain point, but then sometimes I can only take so much, and then I'll escape into fiction. But I'm constantly trying to read both fiction and nonfiction. I also like the classics. I like to read also Lee Childs, and I don't read as many horror novels because of what I do during the day. I don't really feel like I can tolerate as much horror, but I do try to, like I say, be broad in the genres. Yeah.
Okay. Anyone has any questions?
I just want to say this is fascinating. Thank you so much for all your thoughts, and it's really interesting to hear about your thoughts and your process.
Well, thank you, Jane. I appreciate it. I appreciate it. And if anybody's a budding writer, then look for your Sisters in Crime. Look that up and join if you like to be a mystery or crime writer. So we'll be happy to have you.
Okay, Linda, I wanted to thank you one more time from the bottom of my heart, because it was a wonderful discussion, and would like to wish you to stay healthy and be safe and everything, and a lot of inspiration, sending a lot of inspiration and positivity, positive vibes to your direction, and wishing you all the best.
Thank you, Lana. I wish the same for everybody. Stay healthy, stay safe.
Thank you, everyone, for joining us. Bye-bye.
All right. Bye.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Bye.
Thanks.